This is Canon Fodder, episode 51, live from Antarctica. With me this week to describe undescribable horrors, friend of the show, Dexter Della Paz. Paz, how we doing?
I would be doing a lot better if I hadn't lost a foot to frostbite and that weird thing with the bat wings wasn't scraping at my window.
Yes, the eldritch umbrella that is flying right at us and scaring the dogs is is alive and killing everyone in the tent. This week, of course, we are talking about H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness, a classic in the eldritch horror genre. Uh, for my money, Lovecraft's best work. Uh, Paz, what are your thoughts on this work?
This one in particular is also my favorite, and I don't think it's terribly close. Many of his works are very good, and everyone knows, at least as a meme, the Call of Cthulhu. But for my money, the only thing that comes close to this, for me personally, is Dunwich Horror.
Mm. I like the Innsmouth and the
Yeah,
horror at Red Hook is pretty
is that
good.
Shadow over Innsmouth?
Yes, the
Is that
Shadow
the
over
full name?
Innsmouth. Yes, I'm such a big fan. I know all the titles by heart, obviously. No, I'm not though. I'm relatively new to Lovecraft. I've read a few different things here and there, and this one has made me a fan. We were talking about before we started. We were talking about listening to audio versions of H.P. Lovecraft, and I am usually I can't do audiobooks, but for some reason it just works with Lovecraft.
Yeah, and like any other audio format, it needs the right narrator. As I was telling you before we went live, I personally very much enjoy Wayne June's readings of Lovecraft. The audience might know him as the narrator of the video game Darkest Dungeon. If you don't, also check that out. It's like a dungeon scroller set in a Lovecraft story, and the writing is better than most novels you'll find out there. It's really tremendous. But to your point, Lovecraft in general lends itself very well to that sort of format, and I think that has something to do with the time they were being written into. That's a time when you were starting to see radio drama, and it was a medium that would have very much been in the minds of people in that time. And just like today, where so many books are basically wannabe screenplays. And that's why we come on shows like this and talk about the classics so that we don't have to deal with that sort of pretentiousness. But I also think that's why so many of these golden age pulp stories come across the way they do. Like they could so easily be radio dramas because that was just the up and coming medium of the time. Even if it wasn't intentional, it was something that was sort of in the milieu.
And one thing I was thinking about as I was listening to this book, especially because of the beginning, and we'll go over all of at least the broad strokes of the plot. In an alternate world, this would have been done instead of War of the Worlds. So you would have had Orson Welles doing a live reading of At the Mountains of Madness, let's say, and people freaking out over what they were hearing.
Easily. This could have easily been War of the Worlds, especially if he did it stretched out over time, like the way the book presents it as various letters and broadcasts sent back over time.
The one thing that I think differentiates Lovecraft from more modern writers, especially people who the kind of pretenders who do the eldritch horror thing, and even a lot of pulp writers at the time, he writes with such authority. Like there's especially at the beginning, there is process and procedure when it comes to excavation. You're learning a lot about geology. You're learning a lot about the ages of the Earth, whether it's the Cambrian or I think he said he mentions the Comanchean a lot in the work. But there's just so much actual information that he puts into his work that you can tell he knows what he's talking about, and he's able to seamlessly slip in his own universe, his own work into it, and it doesn't seem
It's not ham-handed. It
exactly.
feels
It's
natural the whole
seamless.
way. It's not. So our narrator in this story is a university professor and a member of an academic expedition to explore Antarctica. And when you see these professor types in a lot of media, you can tell. I'm going to borrow a line from someone. I wish I could credit it because I don't know who gave this take first, but it's one of my favorite takes ever. It's an example of midwits trying to write actually smart people. Is
That
a
was
lot of
that
what
was
you
a
see in
that was a
the
4th
media
chan
today.
post.
It might have been. So
Yeah.
credit to the Chans, but it's brilliantly true, and you can tell that the narrator for this story is an example of a smart person writing a smart person, as opposed to the garbage we get today on stuff like The West Wing
Right.
or any given comic book or whatever.
Yeah, that 4chan post is about the show Sherlock, and there it's midwits writing Sherlock Holmes as like this guy who's basically a magician, and he doesn't have to explain anything because they can't explain how he does what he does. They just, oh, he's a genius. He can do this. He can do that.
Yeah, not to derail us, but unlike Doyle, for anyone who's actually read the Holmes stories, he does actually reverse engineer it all at the end of every story, and it's very satisfying most of the time.
Yes, I definitely recommend reading Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. It's funny, and again, we're going to derail a lot. That's probably one of my favorite things to do on this podcast. There's one of those little free libraries near my house, and they had a collection of not Sherlock Holmes. So it was all the stories of the contemporaries and predecessors of Sherlock Holmes who weren't as famous. So there were a couple of Father Brown stories. There were a couple of predecessors, a few American takes on Sherlock Holmes. Very cool thing. I
Were
didn't end up
any of
picking.
them any good? Did you try it?
I didn't pick it up. I just kind of saw it and left it for somebody who would be more interested.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I haven't done any detective stories other than Sherlock, but I have a deep and abiding love for him. He was the first real literature I ever tackled, and I must have been like 6 years old. I didn't get a lot of it at the time, obviously, because I was an absolute kid, but I kept reading and rereading and rereading them as I grew up, and it's Sherlock has a special place for me, but I don't think he ever made it to Antarctica.
Most definitely, and that's something that you and I can cover in the future as well.
Oh yeah,
But
you don't even have to think twice.
we are here to talk about the team from Miskatonic University. Opening up, as we kind of talked about before, it's almost boring because it's so procedural. I think back to, did you ever read the diaries of like Ernest Shackleton and his adventure story of discovering Antarctica and go, or not discovering, but exploring Antarctica?
I haven't, but I wish I had in times like this.
It's very I've only, I don't mean to sound like an expert at all, but I've read a couple of them in preparation, and I was like, oh yeah, no, I can definitely see, like, it's a travel blog almost, it's a travel diary, uh that that Professor Dyer, who's the geologist, is, and our main character is writing, and he's also the head of this expedition. And it's super procedural. They make sure to account for every piece of equipment. There's always constant communication. He explains that they're going to build these aeroplanes and they're going to fly around the mountains. uh, they communicate via wireless radio. They use flashlights that they call handheld torches. It's all very laid out so that when the weird things do come up, right, and they come and they kind of drip like a morphine drip, right, suddenly everything that you thought you knew is turned upside down, and you're going through the same things that the characters are going through.
Yeah, and obviously that's a play towards immersion, right? He goes to through such great detail to do that, to make it feel like reality, to make it feel like it's a very serious scientific thing because that amplifies the weird at the end of the day, doesn't it?
Oh, most definitely. So Professor Dyer and his team go to Antarctica. They start doing a lot of drilling. An advanced group goes off and makes a ton of discoveries. They're finding things that shouldn't be there, whether it's these sort of in between plants and animals that are way too old and just that just shouldn't exist, and they're almost popping the champagne at their discovery, only for that team to be horribly mangled. They originally think by one of the crew members who have gone insane, but it actually turns out later to be one of the monsters reborn.
Yeah, and what is there to add at that point other than, how would you feel? So reframing it, right? I was just talking about immersion. And so you're into this. You're already in the headspace that this is clearly just an academic exercise. It's going well. Put yourself in your own frame of mind when you've just had a significant professional success. And then all of a sudden, you're already celebrating something you didn't necessarily think was possible. It's this moment of high optimism. And you're thinking to yourself, oh, that's so cool. And then something horrible happens. And it's not just horrible, but it's also surreal. We threw out the word incomprehensible at the very beginning. And this is incomprehensible, not necessarily in the way people usually associate with Lovecraft, but in the more conventional sense of how can you even make sense of this happening?
Definitely, and there's a definite switch turned on by Professor Dyer at one point where they stop broadcasting their discoveries because they're no longer exciting but horrifying. So they actually start self-censoring and making sure that the ship's captain, who's they're on a ship called the Arkham, which is based on Arkham, Massachusetts, where Miskatonic University is, and they're relaying via radio to the ship's captain, who then sends it back to the U.S. for the Arkham local newspaper to print out. They're talking about all of these discoveries they're making, and like a quarter of the way through the book, Professor Dyer and the other scientists agree. Okay, we cannot let anybody know what's actually here. It's too weird. It's going to upset a lot of people, and we can't even properly contextualize what we're finding.
Yeah, and I think that there is, for me, I suppose this almost seems obvious, but for me, that more than anything is where the dread really starts to land and starts to hit home. Because before this, you're like, okay, here's our first monster encounter. And it's good for a jump scare. And you're starting to feel a little spooked because, oh my gosh, it's finally happening now. But then you get to this scene and you're having this moment where it's not just you, the reader. Now the characters are starting to feel it too. And because Lovecraft did such a good job immersing you, he pulls you back in. If that first scene, if the massacre knocked you out of it and made you remember in your own adrenaline dump that you were a reader, it's this moment that gets you back in there and associating with the characters. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, they are so horrified of what's going on that they're basically going into isolation.
I want to. Have you seen the movie The Thing?
Is there even any doubt?
I just have to ask, but yes, it's Carpenter captures that feeling perfectly on screen, where not only do you not know what it is, the unknown unknowns are just as terrifying as the known unknown, which is this creature that's going around the camp, right? And it's just it's pure Lovecraft, right? Because you you cannot possibly fathom the there are too many questions raised by the existence of the horrible creature that is haunting you, right? And I think in at the Mountains of Madness, you have Danforth, who is probably the prototypical, or rather the what's the word? The archetypal example of this, right? He's so he's so damaged by what he sees and by what he knows, because he's the only person on the expedition that has read the entire contents of the Necronomicon. That knowledge has has made him a cipher for the Eldritch horrors, right? So the fact that he is one of the only survivors, but also the one who loses his mind completely. It's very very cool what Lovecraft's doing there. I wanted to bring that up especially because your show Scarlet Thread Society did a recent episode on black magic books, which the
Yes,
Necronomicon is.
the Svarboken of Scandinavian tradition. Shout out to my associate with that, at Altphilology on Twitter, Doc Brown. He was kind enough to come and lecture me. And our theme of the episode was, well, exactly what you said. It's in the title. It's black books. It's not, it is spell books, it is witchcraft. But a running theme for him and I, even in his other appearances, has been, not just evil magic, but genuinely cursed books. And how can I say this? First of all, I am going to say to your audience that I literally believe such things exist. And I also want to say that they have a deleterious spiritual effect on a person. But even if they didn't, they do. But even if they didn't, it could be this sort of Lovecraftian framing too, where they just drive a person mad. And at that point, the effect is basically the same as if they were actually cursing you, anyways.
I wonder, so, because that whole episode you did was on forbidden knowledge, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And I wanted to I wanted to kind of get at, like, what did HP Lovecraft know, or what did he think that he knew that he just had to get out in the world? Because he created such a deep mythology around the idea of the horrific unknown. It was like he was writing his own black books, but self-censoring so that nobody else kind of knew what he was thinking.
And this is something people raise about Lovecraft quite a bit. Whether, oh my gosh, was it really actually real? Did he know something? Is this book actually out there? It's impossible to say because people have written Necronomicons
Yes, I have.
now.
Yeah. I think there's one at my local library.
Yeah, and by and large, they're actually just garbage, anyways.
Mhm.
Like, if you think you're going to get into something spooky, don't. You're just getting a poorly written pulp novel, pulp
And you
horror.
shouldn't be looking for these kinds of things, folks. I think yourself and Mr. Brown make that case very succinctly.
I,
Don't go looking for these things.
yeah, it's one thing to come across it, but don't seek it out. um,
It's
but
funny.
that is the sort of thing that could exist. But that said, I don't have any reason to believe that Lovecraft, especially as a near shut in, anyways, would have ever encountered one, no matter how nice his family library was.
It's funny to kind of bring it back to forbidden books for a second. I was at a kind of a local chain bookstore, right? You know, like how every city has their alternative to Barnes and Noble, right? And in the religion section, there was an honest to goodness banned book. It was a copy of Kevin McDonald's book, and it was just like out there, and it was frontward facing, so it was something that they wanted advertised. And I just kept thinking to myself, If someone were to pick this up and take it to the front, that's almost like just outing yourself, and like you're just asking for somebody to ruin your life at that point.
I'm going to be honest. I don't even actually know what book you're referencing.
The Culture of Critique, I think it was. I've never actually read it, but I just know of it. It's like it's in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, I guess I missed that part of the culture,
That's
but
fine.
I'm prepared to take your word for it because there are a handful of books out there like that. Despite what the online right wing would have you think, imagine trying to buy a sailor book. I
Right,
assume it's
right.
the same sort of thing.
Very similar, more overt, I believe. We don't have to get into it here. I'm certainly not the person to talk about it. I don't know what it's about so much as I just know it's one of those things, you know.
But to
Uh,
your point, there are banned books, there are forbidden books, and there are cursed books, and sometimes these things overlap. They are not quite a Venn diagram with each other, but sometimes they are.
you're a more conspiratorially minded person, as am I. I think I'm correct in saying that. Just based on Scarlet Thread Society, based on what you guys do on TLE and some of your posting online, there has always been weirdness around Antarctica, and I wanted to get your take on the Antarctica mystery.
So Antarctica, right? And that's that's a very good topic to pursue here because there's to your point, there's always been weirdness around it. Part of that is just the frontier effect. It's one of the last places that we haven't truly examined, mapped, charted, even though you see it on things going as far back as like the Piri Reis map, for instance. There were Ottoman admirals in the 16th century that knew it was there, and they were claiming that their own maps at that time were based on ancient maps by their standards. So
Right,
maybe
Greek
even
maps or
right Romans or pre-Roman maps with Antarctica on it. And we also know that very certain select parts of it are actually far more habitable than the average imagination would have you think, due to hot springs and whatnot, volcanic activity warming the ground. And then, so you have this landmass that people have been aware of far longer than is generally realized. It is more habitable than people realize, and it is fully protected and locked down by an international alliance that has defied a century of Cold War footing. So, what does a person do with that, right?
right. And I think part of it is also the mystery that still surrounds it today. Like it's impossible, or not impossible, but it's very unlikely that you or I could get to Antarctica today, and then only at a very sort of
You are allowed to
you get
gaze
the
on it from a
Pyongyang.
distance, and that is literally all you're allowed.
Yeah, you get the Pyongyang experience.
But now, even with that being the case, there's still luminaries left and right who are going down there on government missions.
Right. I think
It
it was a
might
big deal. The Pope went down there at some point. It's like what is the Pope doing there?
the Pope, presidents, astronauts of all things, as if they would know anything about anything going on down there. And that's one of the things that really triggered a lot of people was when Buzz Aldrin went down there. Because what the hell, right? So you have all these extremely powerful people with no obvious specialization in biology or climatology or meteorology or any of the relevant fields in which you would be doing research at a place like that. And they're all just down there for visits. And not only that, but it's at especially auspicious times too. Because the last time we saw a wave of that activity was right before Donald Trump's election.
So this is
Way,
where
way
the
all the way back
Illuminati.
in 2015 now. Yeah.
Wow.
So why were they all fleeing down there at that time, right? What was going on in 2015 in Antarctica? It's a great question that will never, ever, ever be answered.
No, definitely not. It reminds me of Bill Cooper's Behold a Pale Horse, where in apparently during the Cold War was an op to fool the aliens, and actually a bunch of state secrets would be exchanged via submarine link in the Arctic Ocean between the Soviets and the Americans. Uh, just one of those things.
Yeah, and for all we know, that could be the case. Continuing on our Antarctic weirdness, there is even more to it, right? We know that there was at least one Nazi research base there for at least a little while. There are plenty of people who like to say Hitler fled to the inner earth there.
Agartha is waiting for you.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very popular meme, even in the current right wing cultural discourse. But even if all of that were still not sufficiently the case for Antarctic weirdness, you have to consider things like the story of Admiral Byrd and Operation High Jump.
I wanted to talk about that because he is referenced in the story. At least not High Jump itself, but Bird's first expedition is referenced in in At the Mountains of Madness. In fact, he's referenced a couple of times. Him and Shackleton and a few others.
And they're called what? Like they're being referenced as the Great Arctic Explorers.
Yes,
If
yes,
Lovecraft only knew what would happen after he wrote this story.
yes, and probably after his death, even.
Yes,
Uh,
yeah, it would have been because High Jump wasn't until like 47, maybe 48.
so explain Operation High Jump for all those listeners out there who aren't as schizophrenic as you or I.
So, what High Jump was is the World War II has just ended. There's still a lot of uncertainty hanging in the air. The Cold War hasn't really gotten up and going yet, but it's beginning to. Nazi hunters are still running around all over the place. And you have Admiral Byrd in the U.S. Navy who takes a group between the size of a flotilla and a fleet.
He
You
takes like
know,
a carrier group. Yeah, he takes a few aircraft carriers, some
yeah.
destroyers, a basically an armada of ships.
Armada is probably the right size word I was looking for. Yeah, something between a flotilla and a proper fleet. And he takes them down to Antarctica on a training exercise to get ready for just in case Arctic combat. He likes screwing around down there. He's one of the U.S.'s genuine Arctic explorers himself, right? So, of course, he would be the man to take a training exercise down there. Well, it's all going hunky dory until they start coming back, and he starts giving weird newspaper interviews in South America. And people who are on the expedition start talking about all the things they saw, and stories start coming out, mostly that have been either disproven, intentionally willed into disbelief, or were just forgeries in and of themselves of fighting UFOs over Antarctica, and that being the whole reason they went down there.
Right,
The
fighting
whole meme,
UFOs
yeah,
plastered in mid-century German iconography.
that's right. That's right. So the idea becomes that they were cleaning up the last base of high-tech Nazi resistance down in Antarctica under the cover of a training exercise. And
And they got their
later,
asses kicked by the because everybody knows about the Bell experiment, right?
yeah, the Nazi bell.
There's sort of interdimensional or their foray into interdimensional technology and various UFO technology. This story being a kind of um, how do you say it? A kind of amalgamation of all those rumors put together. It's difficult to figure out what's I don't even want to say true, but what is factual in that case.
And the most complicating part of all of it is that there has since been published a diary attributed to Admiral Byrd, where he also talks about all of this in his own thoughts. But it has been highly contentious
Hmm.
as to whether or not it is genuine.
I mean, I've heard as much as it's just made up.
And that is where most people choose to land on it. I have actually, if I can self promote here for a moment, been trying to wrangle an expert to come on my show and talk to me about it.
Oh, that would be
Because-
so good. And feel free to shill as much as you want because you put out a very high quality product.
So I suppose that's kind of, in very brief, the whole deal with Antarctic weirdness. Uh, this place has been a human fascination for a very, very long time. So it's kind of no surprise that Lovecraft would pick this place as the epicenter. And one of the things to bring it back that Lovecraft does really well is he weaves all of his stories together quite deftly, quite adroitly. And in choosing to base the elder civilization here in Antarctica, I think he was making a really informed and wise decision because it is a place that holds that sort of allure
Right.
for us now, for us then, and presumably for us in the further past. People have always been fascinated by what could be hiding there.
Right. And it's a giant continent on this earth that we can't access. You know, it's this huge landmass. We didn't even talk about, and we can talk about him right now. H.G. Wells and the journey to the center of the earth, the hollow Earth theory, the pockets, as you were kind of talking about, the pockets of volcanic volcanic heat that are trapped under the ice that could be holding some kind of life. You know, whether it's DC Comics, Marvel Comics, whether it's television shows, people have been talking about for forever the idea that there is something underneath the ice of Antarctica. I even remember that really crappy Alien versus Predator movie.
The one from like '07, '08, or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, the first one where it's literally a team of explorers goes to Antarctica. They're mostly scientists and a few mercenaries, and they accidentally release the aliens, so they have to wake up the predator to kill them. And the predator's the good guy, but he's also like killing all the. It's kind of stupid, but
Well, that was kind of a common movie trope we were doing in America in the late '90s through about the late aughts, because that was the same period that gave us Freddy versus Jason,
right,
and
the
I
mashup.
believe even a couple of Godzilla movies too. It was just kind of an era in American storytelling where we decided to collectively get into what if two really tough bad guys decided to fight and innocents were just stuck in the middle of it.
Right.
And they were treating it like this profound thing, as if that's not the story of every war in human history, anyways.
Yeah, you unlocked a memory of Freddy versus Jason. I was too young to watch it, but I watched it anyway, and I was like, "Oh no, this is going to affect me for a while."
Well, my first run in with the Halloween movies was turning on AMC while I was homesick in grade school during the month of October when they still did, back in the day when they did Fright Fest all month instead of just for a couple weeks. So I definitely got into slashers a little too early as well, but I'd like to think I turned out fine.
And you got the redacted ones on TV. You didn't even get to see the tits.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's probably a good thing.
Probably for the best. So kind of getting back to the book. If we're gonna do a weave, right? We gotta get back to the book. Halfway through the book, it is obvious that and this is classified as a novella, but from what I was able to find, it's at that 65,000 word mark. It's basically a novel. So it's interesting that it's published as a novella. People talk about it as a novella because it's very long. It's what 10, 15 chapters.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, so the team, or really it's Dyer and Danforth get to the Mountains of Madness, only to discover that it's actually a 30,000-foot city. The mountains that they've been looking at are actually the ramparts of an ancient city. And there's some really interesting description of what the eldritch creatures uh, lived like. You know, he talks about cylindrical couches and sort of this is what they used for currency, and like these things acted civilized in their own way before they were destroyed by whatever monster it is that ended up taking over.
And there's really interesting thing going on through this part of the book. At least I'm going to just continue to bash on modern literature, actually, is what I'm about to do. But he
Please
keeps
do.
his characters in character,
Yes.
and he does a brilliant job of that. Because as they're traipsing through this city and they're discovering all this stuff, they are taking just meticulous notes on it. And they are doing the same exact sort of anthropological work that they were sent down there to do. And that is the frame of the storytelling. They're taking notes on all of this. And they are talking like two experts in their fields would. Like, oh, this is clearly a sign of when this era shifted to this era.
Right.
And by
Even
the
when
change in
Danforth
design, we can intuit this.
even when Danforth sort of loses his mind a little bit, and he fully loses it at the end, but he's going through the process of madness. He still has enough of his faculties to record, to do his job, to be a man of science.
And I think that is actually this is another one of the things that makes Lovecraft in particular so special, is because he does a good job portraying madness not as some cartoon villain bullshit, but rather what madness actually looks like. In that you get these really good flashes of lucidity from
Mm-hmm.
them, even as they are driven bananas.
Most definitely. There's what was that one part? I think it was when he was describing the Shaggoths. Right? Am I saying that right? The Shoggoths.
I have always said Shoggoths, but I won't pretend to be
Well, anyway, so the Shoggoths are originally bred to be sort of beasts of burden and laborers, and even the eldritch horrors like take for granted what these things are, and they end up becoming the downfall of this civilization.
Yeah, and at
Like,
that point,
even
it
the
basically turns into like a slave revolt story that they're
right,
sort of you sort of read into this.
right, and you only get this because of the interpretations that Professor Dyer is making out of sort of hieroglyphs and pictures and such.
Yeah, and it's worth noting here too that this story is really not about the old ones, which I believe is even a turn of phrase he uses to describe them here in this story.
Right.
It is really about these Shoggoths. They're the things that awaken and destroy the advance team. They're the things that scare their dogs, that they try to dissect and find mummified corpses of. Throughout this story, the unknowable still stays the unknowable, but it's not like he's never put a description on any of his creatures, because there's actually several scenes where he goes into great depth talking about this created servant race that his characters, allege became the end of the Elder One's civilization. That or a traumatic climate event, which was also a posited theory.
There's one part that really interested me and showed sort of Lovecraft's bona fides and really his brain. Uh, they're exploring the city, and they need to trace their steps. So what they're going to do is they're going to put pieces of paper on the walls. But at the same time, they need the paper in order to put down their own notes. So they're they're kind of struggling with, okay, what should we do here? Should we sacrifice the paper so that we can do some more exploring, or should we uh, pull ourselves back a little bit and use the paper that we were going to use as like sort of breadcrumbs to find our way home in order to explore this amazing city that should not exist. Just showing the that he put so much thought into this.
Yeah, and I would love a look inside his storyboarding process to see just how he came up with this stuff or how he chose to write this, whether he was an outliner or whether he was making actual story maps or just what his process was, because there's no way you could just vomit this sort of stuff onto paper like so many writers try to.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, I've written, because I have a couple of books out myself, and I have written a scene where it's a bunch of people talking in the back of like a Humvee, right? And I even had to kind of sketch out where each person was sitting in order to kind of get my mind right about, okay, well, this person's kind of facing forward, so he'd have to turn back. This guy's driving, so he can't really hear so well. This guy's in the turret, so he can't hear anything, and he can't really participate. Uh, and just that kind of continuity for something that lasts like maybe a couple of paragraphs, So it really shows his depth of thought to be able to map out an alternative world, but still keeping within the, let's say, the rules or the laws of this world. One of the things that kind of pisses me off about modern fantasy, let's say, is one, they don't even keep their own rules, right? These writers are constantly breaking their own rules without explanation. But they decide that they're going to make up the rules. They're going to make up the laws of nature just so it can suit a fun idea they once had.
Yeah, as opposed to these pantheonic writers you discuss here and that you've had me on to talk about a couple of them. These are firmly grounded in physics as we understand them. They are firmly grounded in the way reality must be processed. And that is, again, like it's talked about regarding Lovecraft a lot, part of what makes his writing hit so hard. He has such a firm understanding of the actual science himself that when he pulls out something that can't be possible, something that violates it, it really is just an oh shit moment for him.
It's so earned, and they actually do everything they can to explain it, to give an explanation for it where one may not exist.
A lot of the other stuff I had a desire to talk about is, I guess, I just wanted to hear you discuss a little bit what you liked and didn't like about it. We've done a pretty good job telling the audience what happened, and we've broken down some of the concepts around it. But, just like I made a point of doing with Heinlein, my appearances previously on your show have involved a lot of fanboying, and I was hoping to get a little bit of that out of you too. What did you really like here? Because I love this story myself.
Oh, there's a lot of talk of quote unquote world building, right? These days, you have to build the world, you have to set the scene, and Lovecraft does that without doing it. He explains time and place just so matter of factly. He almost gets it out of the way, but he it's always grounded in the setting. It's hard to say. I really enjoy the mood, I guess, that he's set up. More so even than the Eldritch horrors, which I'm I'm new to that sort of fiction. As a reader, I was always more into the science fiction aspects of weird fiction than sort of the horror aspects. And yeah, he proves himself. He writes with authority, whereas a lot of people They just kind of make stuff up because it sounds cool. They don't have that layer of education and kind of being an interesting person to go deeper than, oh, I just had this cool idea where these planets are, or where these bits of land, let's say, are floating, a la something in Avatar.
Yeah, anime and its influences, anime and its consequences, etc., etc. Um,
Right. That's one thing you'll never see, like a Dragon Ball Z character fighting Cthulhu, and winning. Uh, well, I guess they call it Thulu in the audiobook that I listened to. No, the C is silent,
yeah,
and
and maybe it's intended to be. That's another one of those instances where how are we supposed to know? I've only ever read it and I'm reading a C there.
right.
It's not like there's an
But
appendix that explains it because that's going to take the magic out of it too.
exactly, but just the references to the Thulu cult throughout really do show that this elder thing, this horror god, right, that is never seen but is always there, uh, cannot be overcome. If it is a if he is an example, or a stand-in for universal entropy, he cannot be overcome. There is no amount of human will or the human spirit that can overcome just the slow, unending horror of non-existence.
And that's something I believe that's even referenced in the beginning of the story too. Suppose I'm racking my brain trying to remember just when it's referenced. But he talks about one of his associates at Miskatonic being an expert in the Dagon cult and how, oh, this is just like that thing the folklorist told me about. And that is just another beautiful example of what you're talking about, that sort of effortless world building. He's not taking the time to paint you a bunch of pictures. He is doing the right thing for immersion and just showing you that his characters already know this. It's already a given of their world. He doesn't need to make a case to you because his characters already know it to be reality.
If I had to be the devil's advocate, if I had to um, point out a flaw, which I'm a little reluctant to do because I don't think it's a flaw, but I would say that not a lot of action.
No,
Right,
no, there's really
everything happens off screen, off page. Right, you're either discovering something or you're being told about something somebody else did, uh, which I think adds to the suspense and to the mood. But I can understand uh, somebody who's reading it rather than sort of listening to it, how that can maybe be a little grating and a little monotonous.
Yeah, and I think part of that too is probably a cultural issue,
Mm,
because a lot of writers were also kind of like that back in the day too. Um, I talked, well, it's been several months ago already now, um, with Art of Darkness
mhm.
about M.R. James, one of the great ghost storytellers in the English tradition. And his many wonderful short ghost stories are the same way. There's no action hit in any of them, even when there kind of should be. A ghost is literally chasing this guy around an inn, and there's still not an action scene.
Right. Well, and it's funny too. One of my favorite novels ever is Jane Eyre, right, by Charlotte Bronte, and a good part of the plot revolves around a maybe not ghost story, and there too, it's a slow burn, and the ending honestly is not very satisfying in regards to it being a ghost story. It's explained away as a crazy wife being locked away. Um, it's a terrific novel. I highly recommend it. But Yeah, there wasn't a lot of payoff for the more supernatural aspects of the book,
Yeah,
and I
and
think that's a product of the time, as you kind of alluded to.
yes, and that's kind of what I was getting at. I think that we are in a cultural mindset today, and this doesn't even need to be wrong of us, but we expect payoff. We've been conditioned to be entitled to payoff. And I guess I don't know for a fact, but I just kind of assume audience of past eras wasn't. This might very well have been satisfying to those readers. I personally found this ending plenty satisfying.
Oh, definitely.
I don't need someone to write me an action scene like I'd see it on a movie screen. Personally speaking, I just don't need that.
Well, it's funny too because I immediately, well, not immediately, but I just thought of Hamlet as a ghost story in which there's a lot of action, but none of it revolves around the ghost. The ghost comes in, right? Whether he's a demon, whether he's actually the ghost of King Hamlet, whether he's some devil, right, or just a figment of Hamlet's imagination too. He's in, he talks, he's gone, and that's it. There's no there's no closure there with the ghost story aspect of Hamlet, but it does. But then we also do get action scenes later on, so it is kind of it is baked into the English and more broadly the Western tradition, I guess.
Yeah, and circling back one more time to M.R. James and my discussion with Art of Darkness, I tend to think there was probably a lot of influence from James on Lovecraft, maybe not
Mm.
even directly, but via Howard and some of those other weird tale authors. Because I tend to think James wasn't necessarily widely published in his own days, but he seems like the type of author who would have been read by those guys. And it seems to me like there is a connection between his work with ghost stories and how some of these great golden era pulp writers we're talking about ended up writing themselves. So I almost wonder if there wasn't some influence there, and if that's not the, if not literally those stories, the kind of stories that taught Lovecraft how to write like this himself.
Well, I know Poe was a more direct influence on Lovecraft and also on this story in particular. It's even referenced at the beginning. Oh, I forget what it's called. Let me look it up real quick. The story is the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, which is one of Edgar Allan Poe's novels about. I think it's let's see. It's about an expedition, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm not trying to turn the literary world on its head or anything here. I just had that idea once upon a time, and I can't really kick it out. Obviously, Poe is more or less the father of all modern horror, but I don't think he necessarily needs to be the only father, I guess is what I'm getting
Fair
at.
enough. I only bring that up because I've never heard of M.R. James. I guess I'll have to go back and listen to that Art of Darkness episode. Yeah, I mean, pause. Is there anything else that you can think of? Because I think we came at this story from every angle, and I think we did a pretty decent job of it. I'm
Yeah,
sure the
and
comments will
instead
let
of
us know what we missed.
instead of covering it chronologically, we did the same exact thing we did on the Heinlein channel or episode rather, where we just kind of circled it and stabbed at it with spears until it went down
Right, right.
like some cavemen mammoth hunting or something. But that's kind of my preferred style. I'm not ADD or anything, but I have a habit of circling things.
Yes, I've also found that the more popular episodes are the ones where we're not just going beat for beat over the plot, but rather demonstrating a deeper understanding of the work.
I think I covered everything I wanted to regarding this story. The big takeaways here are Lovecraft is rightly referenced as a master, but don't take his pop culture reputation seriously. Actually, read him for yourself. If you refuse to read it, I don't know why you're listening to this show, but if that's the case, then go listen to Wayne June's narration of it on YouTube. It is haunting. And, consider reading other stuff in this vein.
I
Read
will
the old horror tales.
I will make sure to link the Wayne Green, you said?
Wayne June.
Wayne June. I will make sure. Sorry, Wayne Green was an old Coast to Coast AM guest.
I remember him.
and uh, actually, yeah, no, that's a good vein too. Very, very. You would think that Art Bell was influenced a little bit by Lovecraft, especially in the ways that he did his Ghost to Ghost episodes, which is
The Halloween special every
yes,
year.
his Halloween special every year was the Ghost to Ghost recordings. I'm definitely going to be listening to them as this comes out, and after you listen to this episode of Canon Fodder, you should go listen to it too, dear listener. Uh, that's all I've got, Paz. Why don't you tell the people how they can support you, what you've got going on, and and anything else that you want to plug.
Yeah, so find me on Twitter. It is not X, it is Twitter at TLE Pause. I am a part of the quartet that makes up the Timeline Earth podcast. Check us out every Wednesday at noon Eastern. We do a news that is not the news show. You might not understand what I mean by that, but give it 3 episodes and you will. I am also the Scarlet Thread Society. You can find that on the Timeline Earth feed, or better yet, on Patreon. I have been doing a book club now since July. We cover one book each month that I advertise it as "This is where the brainworms come from." They are nonfiction conspiracy texts that give you a little window into the weird of this world. In addition, on the Patreon, you will find tier options that give you access to some paywalled podcast content that I think is quite good. You'll have to listen to find out, so do that. And also access to a Discord I have set up for the Scarlet Thread Society to host those book club discussions, both in audio chat once a month for paid members or just as a text forum for free tier members.
What's the book for November, Pause?
The book for November. Well, here in the month of October, we just started a trilogy. We are working through the Sinister Forces trilogy by Peter Levenda. It is a study of UFOs, serial killing, and witchcraft throughout American history. That sounds like quite a bit because it is, but that's why it was a trilogy of books.
Oh, that's
It is
awesome.
comprehensive. So our book for October has been book 1, titled The Nine. November will be book 2, A Warm Gun.
That's wonderful. I'm excited. I'm gonna join the Discord and try and follow along because that's right up my alley. And dear listener, I highly suggest you do as well. They do great work over at Timeline Earth, and you, Paz, do a great job with Scarlet Thread Society. I'm always learning something new.
Thank you. That is the idea.
As for me, a couple of new things on the horizon here. I have joined forces with Cap over at Tukey's Magazine. Every week we are doing a show called The Library of Mass Destruction, where, much like the Scarlet Thread Society, we are reading schizo books. Our book right now is Aberration in the Heartland of the Real, The Many Lives of Timothy McVeigh by Wendy S. Painting, PhD.
Just a phenomenal choice there, by the way.
Oh, this is my second or third read through, and it's a phenomenal book. Talk about comprehensive. She really attacks that event through every possible avenue of approach, right? So beside, if you really like Canon Fodder and you want to hear me crack jokes about a really horrific event, actually, you can follow Tukey's Mag and catch us there. Double Dealer magazines are still available for sale. I have 2 novels out that you can purchase on Amazon.com, and I keep posting my short stories to my Substack, as well as some other things to the Double Dealer Substack. So a lot of TR Hudson stuff that you can get out there if you want more. I'm terrible at ending podcasts, so I will just say insert ending here.